Hello, Garland Nixon here with the one and only Laith Marouf, he of freepalestine.video, where all the good work is done. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with the one and only Laith Marouf. Laith has a great, as you can see right below his name, it's very, very important that you go to freepalestine.video, particularly now that the war has expanded again. The U.S. imperial war in the Middle East and South Asia has once again expanded. Not that it ever stopped. It turn the volume down just a little bit and turn it back up. It never really stopped. But the freepalestine.video, their work does not stop. It's important. So go there. It's a great website. You can find lots of all the video there. You can find, what's happening on the battlefield, you name it. Very dangerous work. But what's important for you is there's a little box that says donate, and they got to keep going. And it's kind of hard. The empire wants to stop them. So hit the donate box. You'll look on there. You can do one-time donations, but it's much better if you donate monthly. So freepalestine.video is the website. Thank you very much, Laith Marouf, for the very dangerous and great work that you do at your site. And everyone, also, it's important that you share that on all your social media platforms. And when you put the posts up, just like I do, make sure you remind everyone how important it is to donate and to go there regularly and to follow freepalestine.video on all their social media platforms. All right, Laith, let's get started. Something I wanted to bring, we got a lot to talk about, but let's start here. HTS seems like they're literally fighting alongside the mask is off. They're attacking the same sites that Israel's attacking. They seem, oddly enough, to have the same enemies as Israel. I've said for a while, it's weird that ISIS attacks Russia, that ISIS attacks Iran. ISIS attacks all of the U.S. empire's adversaries, but they never attack the U.S. empire or Israel. Well, now they're fighting literally, attacking the same targets as Israel at the same time. And for some reason, Israel, they bomb all around them, but they don't actually bomb HTS. What's going on with that, Laith?
Yeah, you put your finger on the spot there. Clearly, HTS as a Wahhabi death squads and the Zionists as with their own death squads have been tools of the empire for the last 100 years to control the Arabic peoples, to fragment them, to cull them, to keep their numbers down, to keep their societies unable to advance and unify, and to fracture them into smaller and smaller groupings. And until now, the empire is succeeding. Now, what has happened here in Lebanon over the last 3 days is attacks by HTS on the north of Lebanon that are coinciding with attacks by the Zionists on the south of Lebanon. And yes, it's hard to anyways keep it on the low now. They're doing it out in the open, this coordination. The attacks by HTS on the north of Lebanon started with 3 Uzbek and Chechen fighters from the Wahhabi death squads crossing into the Lebanese village of Hosh Sayyid Ali and attempting to, rustle this herd of cows from a farmer who had his own personal gun and shot the 3 of them dead, leading to HTS enforcements coming to try to take the village and crossing the border, and the local tribes and clans fighting them back, destroying at least 4 tanks, killing many of these foreign fighters that are in Syria. And yesterday I was up in the border area trying to record a report from the region, and we saw the clashes. We saw the arrival of the Lebanese military, which stood there and watched for a while, and then eventually actually blocked the roads into the village and not allowing the local inhabitants to fight for their own land, basically. So you could see even how the Lebanese military now is part of this whole ploy to, destroy the resistance in Lebanon. Not only STS and Israel are involved in this project.
Well, here's what's interesting. I got to add to this. You can see the empire is in its final throes and it's desperate. And here's what I mean. For a while, I've been saying the U.S. has the exact same kinds of ventures, one in Ukraine, one in the Middle East. For this reason, what do you see in Ukraine? They're bringing mercenaries from all over the world, anywhere they can muster them. The most extreme, the Zionist, excuse me, the Nazis and crazies from all over the world. These mercenaries, they flood them into Ukraine to go, fight the Russians. And what do you have in the Middle East? They bring these, crazies the same way, whether they're from Chechnya or wherever they can get them, Uzbeks, you name them, and they flood them in. It seems like the exact same thing where the empire just reaches for the most crazy, bloodthirsty extremists they can find, and they flood them both into these zones. And I think part of it is this, because they can't find anybody else to fight, because they can't put their own people. The United States can't put its own people there because its people will revolt. They can't put their people we can't put boots on the ground in either one of these conflicts because the people will revolt and will figure out what's going on. So instead, isn't it interesting that it's like the exact same dynamic in both places? I think it tells us something about the state of the empire, doesn't it?
Yes, yes. And if we look back in history to empires that resorted to using mercenary armies as their main land forces, the last such empire was the Ottomans, and that were, have with their Janissaries, these captured slaves from all around the world that they would send as their mercenaries. How did the Ottomans came to be who they are? Before them, the Abbasid Empire in the Arabic world was importing all these Central Asian Turkic peoples as their mercenaries, and they revolted and took over the empire. So right now the West has not only created these Nazi and Zionist and Wahhabi mercenary armies around the world, they brought them back to Paris, to London, to Berlin. All these millions of refugees that the West accepted, they were all, by the way, screened before. And they were screened to be Wahhabi, to be Muslim Brotherhood, to be Nazi, to be Zionist. Not actually, they were not screened to be peaceful people. Only those who supported the Wahhabi cult and the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, that in Syria, received immigration rights to France, Germany, Canada, the US. The real poor people of Syria that were suffering under the conditions of the war that didn't support these fascists were not given immigration. So you could imagine, by just looking back in history, what's going to happen in these capitals once the Nazis, the Zionists, and the Wahhabis, Muslim Brotherhood types, become so powerful that they can take over the country. And we're kind of seeing it already, right? Whether it's with the Zionists taking over the government in the United States, with Trump, and as we see the stuff, and or the Nazis taking over in Canada and the Ukraine, in the US, UK, and Germany, who are refusing to end the war in Ukraine. So eventually, those fascist hordes that a empire, creates, take over its own capital.
Yeah, I call it like kind of the Hitler effect, where the powers, the imperial and the colonial powers built the Nazi empire to go against Russia. and it was a fascist empire, and it got out of control like a mad dog and started attacking its master. That's the same way when you start putting these extremist elements in power in Ukraine, and now they're trying to calm them down. Well, we can't afford this one, we want to move on to this one. No, they're not going to listen. You know, you put them in power, they're in power here, they're in power in Canada. You put these, that's the Hitler effect. When you create these extremists in your midst, at some point, they're not going to listen to you anymore. And when you say, okay, well, we've decided to change, do this, no, they're true believers and they ain't going to listen. And that's, I agree with you. Now, let's talk about which is the big story, and that is the return of the ceasefire. The return, what they call the breaking of the ceasefire. But if you really look at it, the attacks on the Palestinians and Lebanon and Syria, everywhere, never really stopped. They stopped the main maybe attacks. They slowed them up on the Gaza. They were still attacking them, but they weren't as intense. But they were still attacking everywhere else. You know, to me, it was in a way, it was a psyop to argue that there was some kind of a ceasefire in the first place, because there never really was a ceasefire. It was just, let's stop, slow it down right here. But they actually turned it up in a lot of other places, and they never really went along with anything they'd agreed with. So is it a restart? Is it a breaking of the ceasefire? Was there ever really a ceasefire? I could argue that there really wasn't. Laith.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there is no more ceasefire in Gaza. The second stage was supposed to start, and Netanyahu decided he's not going to go for the second stage of the ceasefire. And look, the Israelis use this period to resupply and fill their military weapons storages and get as much fixed up as possible to re-begin this war and to drag Trump into, as we see, a larger war in the region that the United States will have to fight on behalf of the Zionists. The Zionists cannot bombard Iran by themselves. They don't have enough air jets, to do so. They need the whole deployment of the U.S. Air Force to do even attack Yemen, as we saw over the last few nights. Now, the Israelis, because their first option that they had in their mind that Trump offered, which is the expulsion, the ethnic cleansing of the Gazan Palestinians, that option was refused by the other vassals, Jordan and Egypt. Therefore, their only other option to maintain a Jewish supremacist pure colony is to kill the Palestinians. They either have to expel the Palestinians or kill them to continue that purity of blood of Jewish supremacy in their state, the majority inside Palestine. And so now we're back to that. Another, example or marker that shows us that we're going into a more vicious even state than the first one, the first stage, is Ben Gvir was reappointed to the government yesterday. He's now again the Minister of Internal Security because he got what he wanted. He was against the ceasefire period, and now the culling, the killing, the massacres are going to continue. So he's back. And the firing of all the chiefs of military and security in Israel. So Netanyahu got rid of all the old guard, the chief of staff, the head of the military, and yesterday also fired the head of the Shin Bet, the Israeli military security intelligence. And he's appointing Messianic Armageddonist generals to lead all the security apparatuses that are not going to be, complaining at the genocidal objectives of this goal or thinking that they're going to be actually conducting a real war against an enemy that is armed. No, their main order is to kill the Palestinian population. And so these new generals, including the new head of the Israeli military intelligence, are all from this caliber. And looking at what Trump is willing to do in Yemen and in the region, I think Netanyahu is right that he he has the ability to continue this genocide, and he has the full backing of the United States.
Yeah, and the ironies going on here that the US would talk to the Russia and say we want to talk about a ceasefire as they break another ceasefire. They got it. We've got a ceasefire. They have a ceasefire. They so-called make deals, say we're going to keep a ceasefire, and they go to Russia and they say, "Hey, let's talk about a ceasefire." It's the level of delusion in the empire. It's like they're still living in the 1990s when China was still poor and Russia was still weak and Iran didn't have some, hypersonic missiles and some ability to inflict pain on the empire when they could just end. The empire was wealthy, still had lots of money, and the people were still deluded enough to support the government overall. They're living in a world where it's still the unipolar moment, and they can do what they want. And it's obvious to me that the Russians are just like, yeah, we'll play along with this. But who in the world? I mean, the irony that they would literally break a ceasefire the night before they talk to someone else about a ceasefire and expect anybody in the world to take this empire seriously. As the Chinese made a statement and they said, if the U.S. decides to whatever they want, if it's economic war, if it's kinetic war, we're ready. And the Iranians say, look, we don't want any trouble. We don't want to fight. But if there's a war, I think that the people around the world are resigning themselves to the reality that they're living with a mad dog, that the empire in its throes of desperation and collapse is a mad dog.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm very glad that you brought up the negotiations between the U.S. and Russia. I don't know if you saw the statement that came out from the White House about the call between President Trump and President Putin. But it should be noted that, and I'm going to read this from the official statement from the White House. This one paragraph, it says the two leaders shared the views that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. Okay. And the other part that, another statement that came on the same day from the former president, former prime minister of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who's very close to President Putin, he tweeted, the phone call between President Putin and Trump proved a well-known idea. There's only Russia and America in the dining room. One on the menu, light appetizers, Brussels sprouts, British fish and chips, and Paris rooster. The main course is Kiev-style cutlet. Enjoy your meal. I would add also Iranian caviar was on the table. Okay. And I know many people would take this maybe the wrong way. And so I want to be very clear. Russia is doing what's best for Russia and Russian people. This is how states work. And this is how statesmen behave. They prioritize their nations. And if they're really sovereign, they can cut up, Iran and make deals over Ukraine and sell out Syria if that betters the chance of Russia. And this is what we're having. And this is what's important for Iran to be very careful stepping forward, is that it needs to continue to be truly sovereign in its military capabilities and ability to defend its nation and land without having to depend on any foreign power, whether it's Russia or China or anybody else. Not because Russia and China are going to betray you or something like that. Russia and China are going to care for Russia and China. And you know what? I'm going to say another statement here that's going to be very harsh for people to hear. It is in the interest of Russia and China for the United States to be stuck in wars in the Arabic world and the Muslim world, and specifically Western Asia, for the next 20 years also. Because already right now, China has surpassed the United States economically, and Russia is on par in terms of its military capabilities as the US, maybe better a little bit, but can't. Another 20 years of the US stuck in killing Arabs and Muslims in Western Asia the gap of advancement will be so fast between China versus the US or Russia versus the US on those levels that it will guarantee that they will never be ever attacked as two countries. And therefore, I can see that Russia and China will not defend Iran.
I'll go one further because see what you're talking about, what people get caught up in emotions, right? They get caught up in I like this country, or these are the good guys or the bad guys or whatever have you. Now here's the reality: Vladimir Putin has 150 million Russians that he's going to look out for first. President Xi has 1.5 billion whatever Chinese that he's going to look out first. Here's the reality: it benefits China for the U.S. to be stuck in Ukraine. It benefits China and Russia for the U.S. to be stuck in Asia fighting. Everyone looks at everyone else's war and says who benefits. Who's benefited the greatest from the Ukraine conflict? Well, actually, Russia and China have benefited greatly, but Russia has lost a lot of people and they've had some pain. But as far as China, they've been, China has strongly supported Russia. Is it because of their love for Russia? Yeah. It ain't love. The reality is they got a border with Russia and Russia has gas and oil that they need. The reality is as long as the U.S. is stuck in Ukraine and wherever else, they ain't fighting China. The same what you said. So I think what people have to understand is when countries look out for their interests, if there's a mad dog, which is we say the U.S. empire, you're going to look at your country and say, I'm better off if he's fighting and killing other people than us. That's the reality. It's not about whether we love or hate Russia or love or hate China as the good guys. And as you're saying, Iran and those in the Middle East have to take that into account with their alliances. I think that's kind of sums it. What do you think?
Yes, definitely. And it's not a statement on Russian values or Chinese values. No, it's a statement of fact, the reality. This is how power politics works. This is how international relations work. This is how states deal with each other. And what has been great about the axis of resistance and what has given hope to the rest of humanity outside those three main powers, outside Russia, China, and the United States, is how they've been able to hold themselves to par, let's say, whether it's people in Gaza and or Yemen and even Lebanon fighting the whole imperial power. There's ups and downs. Yes, Syria was lost, but Syria will return. This is not at the end of it. And you have to stay friends with Russia and China. This is not saying that you have to think that they are enemies, but Russia and China will support Iran, and Russia wouldn't care anymore if Iran surpasses Israel militarily if the axis of resistance actually wins without Russia having to risk anything.
Right.
On their behalf, right? Or China risks anything. Right? China wants to sell its products to everybody in the region. It needs the business. It's as long as you're not threatening Chinese financial advancement and commercial advancements, you can take out Israel. Okay. Similarly, the Russians will abandon their support for Israel if they can see a regional power that they have no choice but to deal with as on par. The Russian state doesn't like Israel, doesn't like Zionism, but fact is, the Zionists have all the non-ending supply of weapons and finances and propaganda from Western capitals. So you have to, even if they're tiny and in reality inflated in power and so on, you have no choice but to deal with them. They can harm, Hollywood can pump up 10 times more movies against the Russians if they want.
How about this? 20% of the Israelis are Russian Jews. So they have a lot of money, even inside, and power and economic power inside of Russia. That is a force that Russia has to deal with in internal politics. I'll even say this. Let me add one other thing too, that it's a reality. There are times when the Iranians look at it and say, we got to make a decision based on Iran. And people say Iran should do this or Iran should do that. And they legitimately should, from a perspective of morals and what's right. But there are times when Iran, as you said, every country's going to, I mean, this is geopolitics historically forever. And this is the way it works. There are times when Iran's going to make a decision that those of us looking at it from the outside said, darn, why would Iran do this? But Iran is making a decision saying, well, we got 80 million Iranians and we got to make a decision for us first. So that goes all the way down. You know what I mean?
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. And after the assassination of President Raisi, some people still want to call it as an accident. I'm sure 100% it was an assassination.
You and me both.
And they, if they would have admitted that it was an assassination, they would have had to go into full-out war, right? And that would have definitely benefited Palestine and Lebanon and Syria and all of that if Iran did that. But the Iranians calculated it and said, well, hold on, we may get nuked. If we go into a direct war and the West sees mass casualties in Israel and full destruction and the end of Israel in a very short period, this could trigger a nuclear war on Iran. Therefore, it's not in our interest to announce that this is an assassination. We're going to lie about it. And we're going to continue hoping to drag this war of attrition for a while, that this will, get the Western populace and elite used to the idea of collapse of Israel, and that it happens slowly but surely, one chip at a time, that when it happens, there's no nuclear war. This is what the Iranian state has calculated. And that led to, of course, the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, the mass destruction of Lebanon, all because choices that Iran made about defending, what's best for its own country, right? Does that mean Iran betrayed the axis of resistance or betrayed Hezbollah or the Lebanese people or Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah? No, it didn't.
Isn't the term real politics or something? Real politique? That's real politique. We have to be honest about how those decisions or why those decisions are made. And that's reality. And you know what? It'll be 10 years before we look back and even can say that it was a right decision or wrong. Just 10 years later, you might look back and say that was foolish, or you might look back and say, well, that was a brilliant decision because if that hadn't happened, this and that wouldn't have. I also argue this. When the Russians started providing, when it started coming out, the Russians are providing a lot of, air defense and all of this stuff to Iran. I think that was because that was when that happened. And a big part of that was it did not benefit the Russians for there to be a big war or some kind of a nuclear conflict in the Middle East with everything going on. So did they do it because they love Iran or whatever? At that point, it was negotiations. Okay, we'll give you this, this, and this if you won't do, you know what I mean? They were negotiating. So even when countries are armed heavily or defended or other things, these are all bargainings. Why did Russia do that? Because it benefited Russia. You know what I mean? They calculated and said, if this happens or that happens, it hurts us or has our interest. Not, oh, we love Iran or we hate Iran. Although these things were about countries do things to benefit their own interests. Let's talk about Syria, what's going on as far as the, I want to get back to Yemen, but I do want to, we want to make sure we hit what's happening inside of Syria that you know about.
Yeah, so over the last 2 nights, Israel has been attacking the south of the country, attacking the province of Daraa and Suwaida. They hit military positions, old bases of the Syrian military that are abandoned. They hit also some of the new made up checkpoints on the entrances of these provinces. And we saw the Israelis advancing further inside the Qunaitra area towards Daraa. And last night there was Israeli attacks in the Hems area, just across from the border of Lebanon, where the clashes were happening between HTS and the Lebanese clans tribes. Again, they were hitting old warehouses of the Syrian military. And so On the ground, HTS continues the genocide in the coastal areas in Latakia, Tartus, and Hama. There's the numbers are up to 15,000 killed, Alawis, Shia, Druze, Christians, that included priests, Christian priests, and Sunni preachers that made statements that are against genocide against the minorities in the region. And in my visit to the north of Lebanon over the last 2 days, we went to a few of the villages that are accepting and taking in the refugees. There's 100,000 people that crossed in a span of a week. And while many of them are from the religious minority sects, there was a huge chunk that was also Sunni, and a lot of them that we talked to told us about how they hid their neighbors, Alawi, Shias, Christians, and then they were found out by HTS, and members of their family also were killed, and they had to escape. These villages right now on the north of Lebanon are possibly a target for HTS. So the villages that are hosting the refugees from this genocide in the coast of Syria are now under threat to be attacked by the HTS. And this is kind of some of the basic stories of what's happening in Syria. Syria is a total mess. Obviously, this is what the West wanted. It's also crazy that while this genocide is happening in the coast of Syria, while this HTS is attacking Lebanon, we heard Annalise Baerbock, the German foreign affairs ministers, announcing, I think, $3 or $4 billion grant to the new government of Al-Jolani in Damascus. It's crazy. It's crazy. And so, and the EU is promising another like $500 million almost. So they're dropping money on Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Nusra Front, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Wahhabi death squads, while they are committing a genocide that our whole world is watching of minorities, of Christians, of Alawis, of Shia. I mean, we live in a crazy world where these leaders in the Western countries are openly, unashamedly funding Wahhabis, Nazis in Ukraine, and Zionists in Palestine. It's crazy.
Well, here's the way I put it: the mask is off. As long as the empire felt in control and strong, it felt the need to hide its brutality. Behind we're the nice people, we're standing up for the minorities and women and the LGBTQ. That's what they've been doing the last so many years. We're standing up for all of the minority groups. So they hid behind this rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter masks, and we're standing up for the little guys that need help. Once the empire realized that it was in trouble, it takes the mask off. And up comes the Nazi flag in Ukraine. Up comes the HTS, the Black ISIS flag. And they're like, well, we got nothing to lose now. Hell, we're in a world of trouble. That's the way it seems to me, that in desperation, they don't have the luxury of pretending that they're, because it's not, to me, here's the way I look at it. It's not that at the same time they happen to be giving them money. They're literally funding a genocide. You know what I mean? They're literally like, oh, you're committing a genocide. Looks like you're running a little short of weapons. Here's some more. We better give them some more money. They're running out of killing all of these people. They're running out of bullets to kill them. They're literally, I call it funding a genocide. In the same way in occupied Palestine, it's exactly the same thing. If somebody's committing a murder and you're handing them money and bullets as they continue to murder, you are legally, you're an accessory to the crime, right?
Oh yes, oh yes. It's like also they're ordering it almost,
Yes.
because it wouldn't happen if they didn't do it. Yeah, like we do live in this moment where the empire has abandoned all soft power and propaganda and is doing things out in the open. It's back to the 1700s of genocide of full nations in the Americas, and doing it openly and calling it religious and godly to do so. Also, remember the first colonists in the Americas requested a religious decree, a fatwa from the Pope, to justify their genocide of the indigenous nations, and that was the papal declaration of terra nullius, which means an empty land, a land without a people, for people without a land.
Where have we heard that lately?
Yeah, so it's the Zionists are just continuing the historical path, and just to show you like that there's nothing unique about Zionism in terms of when we look at about the history of colonialism that the Europeans conducted and genocides. And the right now the all elite in the West have adopted Zionism as the religion of the state, not Judaism, the religion of our prophet, the liberator of the slaves, Moses. It's the opposite of the religion of Moses. This is saying that there's a chosen people, and we can kill and steal, and on as long as you're part of those chosen people. This is what Zionism is, and this is what the West, European colonial powers in the old days openly also said of themselves. Manifest destiny, and the racial hierarchies that were created, and white supremacy and so forth. Those are just now Zionism is the cool way to do all of that. When a quote unquote supposedly Christian guy like J.D. Vance comes on TV and says, these are the chosen people, or yesterday Trump on TV also saying Islam hates us, right? And so non-Muslim, Islam and Muslims, the whole thing is hates.
Well, how about this? How about this? When Jewish people, including Jewish rabbis in America, when they come out and they protest Zionism, they grab the Jewish rabbis. Now, these are non-Jewish people. These are Christians. Grab the Jewish rabbis, beat them up, drag them away, and call them anti-Semites. So a Jewish rabbi who opposes Zionism is an anti-Semite, but yet a bunch of Christian Zionists, because you can be, first of all, if you can be a Christian Zionist, then Zionism clearly is not connected to the Judaism religion. You can be anything you want and be a Zionist, right? So clearly, if I say I don't like Joe Biden, whoever, I don't like Trump, whoever, I don't like him because he's a Zionist, right? And I'm Jewish and I'm a rabbi, I am committing anti-Semitism. It's anti-Semitic for the people who are Jewish to protest against non-Jewish Zionist presidents. And the Jewish rabbis are anti-Semites. Well, clearly, you're turning reality inside out.
Oh yes. Look, and this is something that me and Jew and many others who are not Jewish but are supportive of Palestine tried very hard to educate the major public in the West about the difference between Judaism and Zionism. Saying all of this, I think right now, because the official law in the West now that Zionism is what Judaism is, and that criticism of Zionism is anti-Jewish, and that you can be a Nazi as long as you support Israel. Okay, this is now the reality, right? And that means that right now, me and you, our work, we've done everything we can. Okay, and me and you, we cannot go head to head against the official Jewish organizations in the West that have the blessing of the governments in the West as the only true representatives of the Jewish communities of those countries. Now, it is the duty of those who call themselves Jewish, true Jews that follow the path of Moses and are anti-Zionist, to go and defend Judaism. Okay, and that doesn't mean just going and demonstrating for Palestine. That's not how you save Judaism. Right now, the vast majority, if not all, official Jewish organizations, yes, there's the fringe organizations, but all officially accepted organizations in the West that call themselves Jewish are Zionist. And they are all in unison repeating in front of the media that Zionism is Judaism and opposing it is anti-Jewish. And the states, governments, and the media tell us those things also. So if true Jews do not go into a direct fight with the anti-Zionist Jews to save Judaism, it's not my job. I've done all I can. And if Judaism is to be branded forever with Zionism, it's not going to be my fault. Okay? That's going to be the fault of Jewish people who are true Jews who didn't do enough to save their own religion. On my behalf, as a Muslim, and the vast majority of Muslims, we've fought over the last 60 years against Wahhabis and against Ikhwanis, and we've given millions of martyrs from Mauritania to Nigeria to Indonesia, fighting these heathens, barbarians that are killing in the name of Islam. And the vast majority of Muslims openly, and every state, including the Saudis and the Qataris and the Emiratis that are slaves and vassals of the West, they call terrorist organizations unrepresentatives of Muslims, right? So I have done what I can to save Islam. I've done what I can to save Judaism. But if the actual anti-Zionist Jews do not risk more than just being arrested, or continue to concentrate only their battle with the authorities instead of with those who usurp their own religion, those fascist rabbis or those fascist Zionist organizations that claim to speak in their name, should be the priority of any Jewish anti-Zionist activities. I don't need them to go out and demonstrate for Palestine, truly, I tell you that. If they cannot go and fight the Zionist usurpers of Judaism, okay? And in the end, if Judaism is to be written off as a fascist religion because of the Zionists, it's not going to be my fault or yours. It's going to be the fault of Jews that didn't truly fight for their own religion's liberation.
Well, I'm a big believer in this, that I say this: these liberal fascists in the West are the worst thing that ever happened to Jewish people. That ultimately, as the U.S. falls and it is collapsing, and I've already heard people say this stuff. What's interesting is I've never seen as much anti-Semitism in my life as I have since this genocide started, right? The worst thing that could happen to Judaism is what Israel's doing, in my opinion. This is my opinion, that people one day, and I've said this, one day people in America, they're always looking for somebody to blame as the empire crashes. And they're going to look at the U.S. and you know what they're going to say? Well, there's all these Jewish people in our government. Oh, look at the Biden administration. It was loaded with Jews, loaded with Zionists, and they're going to blame Jewish people. That the fact that the so-called Israel and the so-called U.S. government standing up for the Jews are setting up a situation where this country is going to fall as a result of its fascist empire. They're going to blame the Jews, and Jewish people are going to suffer. The people, all this business about all the rainbow flags and all that stuff, as this happens, you know what they're going to do? They're going to blame gay people. It'll be violence against gay people. When they put people out there and they fly the flag of this particular group and they say, we're using this group to do their dirty work and their evil work, ultimately, that group is the one that will suffer, that people will come back and they'll blame that group And at some point, the pain will be inflicted upon that group where they were stuck out by the empire and used as human shields to do their imperial dirty work. They will come where and guess what? The same imperial people that stood up and said, yes, we're doing this to save this group will turn on the damn group too. And say, yes, come to think of it, it was the Jewish people and the gay people or whatever group that caused us to do that. We weren't doing it on our own. We'll join you. Let's go get them. And the same people that were their so-called protectors will turn on them and blame them because they don't want to be blamed themselves.
Oh, yes.
Be careful getting in what is it, the Faustian deal. When you make a deal with the devil, and that's what they're doing. You make a deal with the empire. You make a deal with the devil. There's been story after story written throughout history. All religions, all have always had some story, some myth about making a deal with the devil. And this is the way it always turns out. Sooner or later, the devil's going to come for your soul in every one of those stories throughout history.
Oh, yes. And because the Zionists have cultivated the fascists into power in the West, including, this idea of strongman leaders back again in the West, like Trump. The Zionists were the championing all of this, emergence of strongman leaders in the West again. The glory of West, civilization, and Israel is the front line of this civilization and so forth. Because they did this now, and we're seeing Trump act like a dictator, bully, decrees,
emperor,
decrees,
the emperor. That's what he wants to be, the emperor. That's what he's acting like, the emperor of the big grand empire.
Yes, and all of these arrests and deportations that are going to be happening, and first they come for the Palestinians, then they come for this and this and that, and it's going to end up with the Jews, especially once it's normalized that anyone can lose all their rights, if the state decides so. And you are right, the empire is collapsing. It's not going to be happening tomorrow. It's going to be a long process. But it's retreating, it's collapsing, it's financially collapsing, it can't compete with China and so forth. And yes, some of our viewers will say, well, but the Jews own all of this or that, in the West. But strong men don't care how much money you have. Look at what MBS did to all the billionaires in Saudi Arabia when he rounded them up in a hotel. Beat them up, shook them down, took all their money back. At any moment, some strong leader like Trump in Western state will do what also Hitler did. Hitler even took their paintings from their houses. Okay.
Let me throw this at you. It's an example. Everybody's talking about the Russians denazifying Ukraine. Let me tell you something. The U.S. built the Nazis in Ukraine. The U.S. built ISIS and Al Qaeda and Bin Laden, right? And when they didn't need him anymore, they had to kill him. Why? They couldn't bring Bin Laden in because he knew too much. He knew all about 9/11, whatever there was to know. Look, here's what I would say. Well, if you could capture Bin Laden, you would certainly want to capture him and bring him in because you could get lots of information from him, right? Why did they shoot him on sight, supposedly, as we understood? I think they did. People were like, is he still alive? Oh, hell no. As soon as they saw him, they immediately shot him. Why? You couldn't have him talking. You couldn't have Bin Laden coming in. Well, wait a minute. They told me to do that. Well, wait a minute. I was received money. They trained. They gave me. No, they had to kill him. And in the same way, they're saying, well, the Russians are going to have to denazify. No, they're not. When the United States created that Nazi regime, when the United States says, we're ready for a deal with Ukraine. It's getting a little expensive. It's a little bit of a problem. They'll go in and kill every one of those Nazis themselves. They'll say, we created you guys. Now we need to deal with the Russians because we got to do this or that over there. And if the Nazis in Ukraine say no, they'll kill every one of them themselves. They'll tell the Russians, you don't worry about the Nazis. We created these Ukrainian Nazis. We're ready for you. Ready for a deal? We're ready for a deal. The Nazis are in the way. Hold my beer. And they'll go over and kill every last one of them. Buy the rest. They'll go to the Nazis and they'll say, here's what we're going to do. Anybody who wants to get paid out, we'll pay you to keep your mouth shut. Anyone who doesn't, we'll kill you or leave. That's up to you. And so ultimately, they create these Frankenstein monsters. And when they're done with them, they'll dispatch of them themselves. What do you think?
Yes, and this is why the Zionists diversified their allegiances. You know, even this battle between Canada and the U.S. and the U.K. and the U.S. and so on. They're playing like they played the Democrats versus the Republicans. You know, in the end, they win, which whoever president wins. So there is some good things that you brought out there, but about Bin Laden, I half jokingly believe that he's not dead, that he's walking in Hollywood with a plastic surgery, you know, that he filmed all those videos in the cave were all shot in a Hollywood studio, like the moon landing, you know, kind of
Did you ever
situation.
see, you know what? Did you ever see a movie called Iron Man 3?
Ah, yes,
Where
yes.
they had, that was, I always looked at that and I'm like, they had this terrorist guy and he was screaming, I'm going to get him, I'm going to blow, and I'm going to do that, right? And then afterwards they would show, and it was just like a movie set. And they had got this guy that was like an alcoholic, that was like a drug addict. And he was an actor, and he would come out and he would be the big, he was like, and I always looked at it and I'm like, I wonder if they're telling us the truth on that. If this whole terrorist thing is I'm convinced that to some extent it is.
Yes, definitely, because all of these Wahhabi death squads, including Al Qaeda, where their main objective was weakening the communist union, communists around the world, Arabic unification, Arabic socialism, Muslim countries like, you know, in Indonesia and others that had a lot of socialist and communist thought, all the you know, traditions of Islam that are tolerant to the minorities that live in our countries. You know, you needed the Wahhabi cult to instigate all these fightings within these countries, to create these civil wars and destroy these countries. So from the beginning of it, all the way to, you know, the first contact between the British and the Sauds, and, you know, how the British gave weapons to the Wahhabi death squads to attack Mecca and Medina in 1930, and to destroy all the shrines there for Muhammad's family and all the disciples of Muhammad, and in the name of Islam. Look, so this is not a conspiracy. This is a fact. The Wahhabi cult has been one of the most useful tools for the Anglo-Western imperialism in history. That and the Zionist cult, both of them have been, you know, I think provided services even better than the Nazis did, okay, to the projection of power and of the West, and the fragmenting societies that the West wants to control.
How about this? There was a guy a while back in somewhere in Florida, Tampa maybe, and he was a Muslim guy, and he went in and shot up some gay club and killed a bunch of people. And they found out that him and his father or something were like FBI informants that had been with the FBI. Okay. There was some people that bombed the concert in England a while back. I don't know, Area Brand, whatever it was, concert. And they found out that the British had brought them over, and they had worked with the British government. Every time we see these major terrorist attacks, coincidentally, we find out that these people were with the FBI, MI6, MI5, and we're supposed to think that it's just a coincidence. I tend to believe that, okay, it wasn't, they went in and this guy goes in and shoots up a gay club and does something terrible. I thought, okay, so at the same time that the government is like doing all the pro-gay stuff and putting rainbow flags at all of the embassies and stuff like that, right? I'm like, well, that to me, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just a crazy conspiracy theorist. I don't know. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's something to think about. It aligns with, okay, we're going to create the idea that Muslims hate gays and they're shooting them all up, and we can use that as a trope to go after them. What do you know? They blew up these concerts, right, in England. But the people that did it had been like, they had, if I'm not mistaken, they had been like transported to Afghanistan and Syria and other places to do all kinds of terrorism in other countries. Well, hell, if the government in England had transported them to other countries to do terrorism, why wouldn't I think they they had also transported them back here to do terrorism because they're doing exactly the same thing. So I tend to believe that a lot of these so-called terrorist attacks inside the U.S., let's not forget 9/11, there was a court case that recently came out where a former FBI guy said that one of the terrorists were being transported or funded. One of the people involved in the 9/11 was being transported and was in touch with US CIA and Saudi intelligence, and that when the FBI tried to look into it, the CIA said, don't do it. So when I look at every one of these internal so-called terrorist attacks, the people are always connected to the government. So it just seems to me that if they're doing it externally, why wouldn't they be doing it internally?
Yes, yes. The terrorists that attacked the concert in the UK were the same ones that the UK transported to Libya to do the war against Libya and to take down Gaddafi. These are people that have been living in the UK, Libyans that have been agents for a couple of generations fighting the Gaddafi government. And upon their return to the UK after raping Gaddafi on live television with a bayonet, they conducted this attack. And you are very right. You know, Trump, when he said yesterday on TV that Islam hates us, you know, the Wahhabi death squads have two major objectives. One, to fracture and fragment Arabic and Muslim societies to become smaller and smaller and easier to control. And the other is to continue providing this flood of attacks inside Western societies to continue the justification for the genocide of Arabs and Muslims by Western powers. And of course, we know that on September 11, if we believe the names that the West put forward as the people that conducted the attack, you know, out of the 11, 10 of them were Saudi citizens. Okay, there was one supposedly Lebanese citizen among the terrorists that conducted 9/11, and he was found here in Lebanon alive and well. And I think the last time I checked a couple of years ago, he was still alive here. Okay, so he's supposed to have died. But point is, even if we accept that the names as true of those who were involved, 10 out of the 11 were Saudi citizens. Did Saudi Arabia get attacked? No, it didn't. Who got attacked? Afghanistan and Iraq destroyed. The Saudis, who managed the Wahhabi death squads, including Al-Qaeda, didn't get any punishment for this because they provided the service as required. There was, just before September 11, for some of our viewers that are born after that or were not aware, just before that was the second intifada in Palestine. And the whole world was already on the side of Palestine then, just like now, during the genocide on Gaza. And Israel was at a critical moment where public opinion globally was starting to hate Zionism and support Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians in particular. And suddenly September 11 happened, and we had 10 years of these terrorist attacks by Wahhabi death squads inside the Western capitals, and 10 years of culling and killing in the Arabic and Muslim countries. And Palestine was forgotten. Okay, and the second intifada collapsed. Okay, so clearly the objectives of the Wahhabi cult are those two goals, and they are providing that service very well to the imperialists.
Well, I'll say this. As I said before, boy, they've attacked Russia, they've attacked Iran, ISIS. I could go on and on. All of the entities that the U.S. sees as adversaries get attacked by ISIS, but never Israel, never the U.S. You know what I mean? And when you look at it, who is it that the Wahhabis hate the most? The Shia. Who is it that the U.S. empire? You know what I mean? It's just, isn't it interesting that ISIS and these Wahhabi death squads have the exact same enemies, adversaries, and they attack the exact same enemies and adversaries, as the U.S., and when you go back to Bin Laden and Al Qaeda, they were the Mujahideen warriors, spirit warriors of Afghanistan. And if people go back to Afghanistan, Afghanistan was a secular society that was doing well. And the U.S. then, what did they do? The U.S. built up an opposition of, again, what? Head chopping crazies. I remember there was a guy in Afghanistan who literally what he would do is go around and throw acid on the faces of women in markets because he was a Wahhab, kind of crazy. And the U.S. like made him one of their lead guys and lionized this guy as some great leader, supposedly to go after Russia. So the history is the U.S. builds these whatever, whether it's Nazi, the empire, the colonialist, whether it's Nazis in Europe or whatever manner of extremists they build, but they also, Americans and people inside the empire don't realize that they use them against us also, that these so-called terrorist attacks are our own government. This is my opinion. I don't know that it's true, but there is evidence that points towards that being true. At any rate, we're going to get going. I certainly appreciate you taking time. And I think these are valuable conversations that people need. We talk about the facts on the ground inside of in the Middle Eastern region. But I think it's also critical that these philosophical conversations that we have that help wake people up about the reality of what's going on inside of their own society and history. Laith, look below his name, freepalestine.video. That's his website. And he does great work there. And if you get nothing else from this, if you don't even listen to the words, if you just fall asleep, and at the very beginning and the very end, you like wake up for just a second and you see something that says freepalestine.video, share that. freepalestine.video. Go to freepalestine.video because there's a lot of great stuff you can get there. There's videos, there's lots of good work, there's battlefield videos, you name it, everything you need to know about what's happening for real and in the region. Go to freepalestine.video. And most importantly, save it on all your share it on all of your social media outlets. And there's a little donate button there. And certainly the imperialists, the empire, the warmongers, the extremists are not going to, they're going to do everything they can to, try to hide it, make sure you can't find it on Google, etc. So it's up to you to share it on all your social media platforms, donate. And when you donate, if you can afford it, make sure you hit the little monthly, even if it's only $5, $10, $20, whatever you can afford, hit the little monthly button so that instead of one time every month, you'll give them something. I mean, just think if we can get 10,000 people to do $5 a month. It may not seem like much to you, but that's going to be enough to keep them going. So let's try to, shoot for 10,000 people at just $5 a month. Even if you only got a little bit, can you do $5 a month? As many people as possible. Let's keep them going. Let's keep the good work going. It is critical that we do this. freepalestine.video. Thanks a lot, Laith. And look forward to talking to you again soon. Keep up the good work. All right.